Okay, welcome back. We're going to get started. Today we're doing lecture number 5. And for those of you who were here last time and I talked about text edit and I said don't use that on a Mac. If you have a Mac, one of my students, one of your fellow classmates sent a nice link to a program called Text Wrangler. And if you're looking at the bottom of my screen right here, if you can see it from a distance, it looks like a, I don't know what that is, like a notepad with a W on it. If you click on it, it'll open up, and it's kind of the notepad for the Mac. And that's the only way I can describe it. It's actually a little better. It's better because it actually color codes, and I'll just show you here, just in case I don't go out and show you examples today. If I open up a text file with the Text Wrangler, I get, if you can see that on the screen, it's blue. The tags are all in blue, and the attributes and things are in maroon. And if I had comments, they would, well, those comments aren't in green, but it's okay. So we get a little bit better than, let's say, you know, a notepad. But still, it's something that you'll have to use if you're on a Mac system. A program like this, it's free. You can download it. It's called Text Wrangler, Text T-E-X-T Wrangler. Anyway, not a bad program. Just do a Google search and you'll find it. I know most of you guys are Windows people, so you could care less. But if you're not, if you are a Mac person, you don't want to use text editor on Mac because that doesn't work. Okay, so moving right along. This is lecture number 5, and lecture number 5 is a bunch of miscellaneous stuff. And I'm going to introduce, towards the end of today, I'll introduce CSS as a concept and show you how it works, and then next week we'll continue. You're not going to learn everything there is to know about CSS today, obviously, but we're going to go through the fundamental stuff. But before I do that, I want to hit some web basics that I skipped over in the beginning. Most of you know this already, but some of you come from business environments may not actually know this. It's only the computer people who are going to know. We've all heard of this, but what I'm going to do is give you some definitions of terms that you probably have been using for years, I'm assuming, without knowing what exactly they are. And there's a few things about the environment that might make more sense as well if we start breaking it down. So the URL, the Uniform Resource Locators, HTTP standing for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. I'm going to kind of go through this quickly because I'm going to assume most of you have already had some experience with this. We don't call it navigating. We don't call it the web. We call it HTTP in terms of what we're doing when we're sending and receiving documents. So managing the hypertext links to navigate the web is actually what is referred to as the HTTP protocol. And it basically just ensures that the process displays various types of information correctly and the web pages look good. When we talk about a uniform resource locator, we're actually talking about a host. And we're talking about not only that, but we're talking about locations, and it's an address resolution in a lot of ways. So the protocol portion of the URL is anything that passes the, anything that follows by the colon. So we have the 2 forward slashes, and then we have the host, and then we have the www. We are all familiar with domain names as a concept, I hope, as well. And what you're doing is you're taking a text name, you're identifying it to a number in terms of an IP address, so we have unique addresses used for identifying computers. We can actually have the same domain name post or host to or forward to different web addresses or trunks of addresses if we wanted to. It's just a better way of remembering it because nobody ever remembers 192.168. Well, you probably remember that if you've worked with routers before. It's usually if you go 1.1, it's the default gateway router or something in terms of your host. So the last part of it is also the domain identifier, identifying the type of institution or the organization. Common identifiers are .edu, .com, .net, .gov, .org. And here's big picture. This is what I kind of wanted to go through. So this is actually kind of important in terms of web HTML because lo and behold, eventually you'll have to use an address somehow to figure out where you're going to locate something. You could actually use addresses that are on your local computer. You can use them on the host that you have just just uploaded your files to. You could use them from another location on the internet. It's all going to follow the same format. Think of it more like a directory structure. And that'll come in handy. And the biggest problem most students have is they upload the files to the host, and they'll put all the images in an IMG directory and all the docs in a DOC directory. and then nothing loads, nothing shows up on the screen, because lo and behold, the address. You have to make sure you actually specify the correct address for where the files are after they've been uploaded. And so a lot of people actually leave out the http:// so you can get away with it actually in some cases and just start out www. But that in some cases will cause you problems, especially if you've got a system in which you may not necessarily be using everything off of an HTTP protocol. It might have some local disk stuff. You can leave all this stuff out and just put the backslashes in and then have the address resolved to the local host, to the local machine. So there's a couple of different ways of getting into trouble when using them, and then that's how most people learn how to use. People know how the addresses work. And as I mentioned before, we can go HTML or we can go HTML in terms of the file extension and everything. This is an interesting name here, index, which is the file name of this file in our example. But I want to say something else about index at this point. Index is a valuable name that's used actually. If you have a web hosting environment and you don't have anything in there and you put one page in that directory and you call it index, it will automatically come up as the home page. If you misspell index, nothing will come up. You'll just see a directory structure. So when you get your web space, or if you already have a web space, most people have figured that out when you go to your address and it's blank, or you see a directory structure, or you see some blank page up there. Some web hosts have taken the liberty to change index and call it welcome or main or something else. But generally, even if it's been renamed or if there's other choices, index will still work because it's part of the network architecture actually, where it's going to identify index. But that's basically how you get your web page to show up. You just call it index, or figure out what it is that you have to call it on a particular web server. And for some strange reason, lately it's been welcome. You always see this big welcome.html as the default page everywhere, which is kind of weird if you think about it. I don't know why they don't like index. So we have absolute and relative links in terms of the types of hyperlinks that we're creating, and it goes to, without notice, to kind of give a definition of these two. An absolute URL is the full web address of the web page with a specific driver of the directory. The relative URL specifies the location of the file relative to the location of the current loading page. So you don't have to actually give the full address, you're just giving the relative address. And this comes from a Unix, because Unix kind of navigating way of traversing directory structures, because the internet is Unix. We're talking about communicating with a Unix server. So everybody always wants their page on web search results. We all know how to do that. We put metadata on the top of the page. Well, if you don't know how to do that, you put metadata on the top of the page so that when someone goes to Google and they type in my favorite animal or something, I don't know, they type in something, it goes and searches through recursively through a set pattern and finds matches. And it just basically is doing a find, and it's searching, and whatever comes up, and then some people pay more to get their website closer up on the top of the results on something, especially if you're selling, let's say iPod earphones or something, or if you have some popular retail product. But you can also do the opposite. Nobody ever cares about this. It's like, why would we want to hide the results? What if you're writing something for school and you don't necessarily want it to be showing up in everybody's search results? We're thinking about this as the World Wide Web, public type of environment. So you can hide web pages from search engines. So your website may include pages that you don't want to include in a search engine result index. Personal information. You might have, in fact, here we have, for instance, you might have a page that stores personal information or private data, let's say, or if not private enough to encrypt, but special security software protocols such as HTTPS should not be returned, let's say, to the user who performs a search in the search engine. So in a lot of cases, websites that use a secure, and this goes without mentioning, the S stands for secure, or should not go without mentioning, I meant to say, HTTP is the same protocol we looked at a few minutes ago. We add the S to it, and there's a little bit more security associated with that. It's an encrypted channel, or a channel in which it's recorded, logged, so you can actually troubleshoot problems and figure out what's going on and provide a higher level of security terms of people accessing your page. So a lot of times you'll go to a URL and I'll say https. That's because that page will never show up in a search engine result. That page is there because it's under a secured environment and it's got something in there that somebody doesn't want everybody to go look at. It just reduces the number of hits that that page is going to get because you don't want it advertised too much. You know, if it were that bad, you'd take it off the internet. But maybe it's embarrassing, or maybe it's something that specific towards an application or something. So you can inform the search engine spiders themselves that you do not want certain pages on your website to be indexed by placing what's called a robots.txt file in the root directory of the web server that hosts your website. So you're uploading things, and you can put in robots.txt as a text file, just the same way as you could put in forwarding files, and you can put in other special files to customize whatever happens in terms of access and the use of that web space. Technique is called a robots exclusion protocol. And for those people who aren't familiar, search engines are nothing more than intelligent agents that use robot technology. You know, they go out, nobody goes out, no human goes out, a robot goes out, and that's what they call it. And there's some set path that's designed, and it goes and it searches. So basically you tell the robot, leave me alone, exclude me. And essentially what ends up happening is your website doesn't show up in the search results. So you can hide yourself if you wanted to. You guys are sitting here going, why do we want to hide ourselves? Because sometimes that you're creating something that you're using inside of a web application that you don't want people to access directly. So it just provides you a little bit more control. So you can go online and search on the word how to get on the website engines, and you can find out how to create the metadata, actually. And you're on there automatically, believe it or not. The more keywords and things you put in your website, the more text is searchable in terms of hits, the easier it is for your website to show up in the results. So let's look at http-equiv as an attribute. And we're going to see this when we start looking at form data. Because now what we're doing is we're doing a post and a request and a receive and all the communication that goes back and forth. And that's why I started originally, and people looked at the slide and went, HTTP, I'm all familiar with that. There's attributes that you can set for environment variables and for protocols. So you can use the protocols and subsets of the protocols for form data, transmitting, submitting, getting information, passing information back and forth between different web pages and things of that nature. Or not even web pages, different servers. You can use it to communicate with a database, all sorts of different things you can use that for. So when the user wants to access a web page, either by entering its URL into the web browser, the address box, or clicking, let's say, a link, user's web browser asks the web server for the web page that's going to be referred to as a request. So this request is equivalent to that particular attribute. So you're getting the HTTP protocol equivalence, which is the request. It says, send me that page. And what the web server returns is called the response. So we have the request and the response that go back. And we'll see this when we apply it to forms. How we're going to use a submit button to submit a request and then send something and then get a response on the server end. So one part of the response is the requested web page. The other might be something else. So the header itself, in return of a response header, it's sent to the web browser before the web page is actually sent in order to provide the information that the web browser is going to need to render the page. And so sometimes the header information that gets sent through, and you see this with scripting languages, might be variables, might be information that's being passed, might be stuff to tell the web browser, hey, we're going to use this plugin, or we're going to use this feature. And so the web browser can prepare itself before the web page actually gets displayed in the browser. So it's kind of an interesting way of using a header, but it's all done, it's all controlled by header information, and we'll be seeing that through a lot of examples. So one of the most important pieces of the information in the response header is the type of data itself, or the content type. And a lot of people take this for granted, but we'll see HTTP used with a dash equivalence, and then we'll say content type, or data, is going to equal text. That means it's text-based. Sometimes it might be something else. We don't necessarily have to send text. So whatever the server happens to be sending can be, you can say, hey, I'm sending you text, or hey, I'm sending you a picture, or I'm sending you, I don't know, data of some sort, or I'm sending you another request or something. or I'm sending you, something that you're going to use for a variable. So I know that was kind of quick, but we'll see more of this when we start looking at forms in a couple weeks, but I thought I'd introduce it now along with some of the other basic concepts that I sort of skipped over already. So let's go back to HTML. Everybody's favorite topic, adding sound to your website. So sound is actually kind of something that you don't want to use too much of. It's that irritating thing when you go to a website and all of a sudden some stuff starts playing in the background. But audio can be compelling, can greatly set the mood of a site. It can complete the experience. Yes, that's your sales pitch. Problems with audio. Audio files can be extremely large. And if you make them small, they play too quickly and then they repeat over and over again. If you want to set it to repeat, and then what ends up happening is you start irritating the user rather than making or completing their user experience. So copyright issues may also be a problem, and audio can be distracting, as well as cross-platform audio is tricky. Nowadays, the audio is not so bad. Cross-platform compatibility is pretty much, everybody's standard support these days of all different types of files. What kind of file can you use? You can use a WAV, which is very large. MP3, smaller, good compression. Real media or RM, we'll see a lot of this here, or MIDI, but real media is pretty much the popular proprietary format. Works with Real Media Player, but also works with other ones as well. It's fairly small. It's a fairly small file type. MIDI has an excellent file size, variable quality, usually mono. It's not necessarily good quality. So if you're thinking about adding audio to something, you have to start thinking, you can't use an MP3. It's smaller, but this is actually, in terms of size, WAV is going to be the biggest. Everybody used to use it. Nobody uses it anymore. MP3 is hard because it's good compression, but it's still smaller, but it's still big. So Real Media is actually quite popular because it has better quality than MIDI and it's just slightly larger. Why do we care? Because the entire file has to be loaded. So let's say you put it in the background. That means your page loads up, customer's there, they're navigating your site, all of a sudden, their audio starts in the background. It's like delayed audio or something, and then it scares them, so they close the browser down or something. I don't know. It causes a problem. So when incorporating it into the page, most people now are using an embedded link, embedded tag, and putting the player or the plugin right into the website. You can use a link. You can also use background sound tag, or you can put it in a CSS element as well. I say embedded tags are probably one of the interesting, most useful type of a way of putting audio and video in there, is because you don't violate copyright infringement. You see nowadays a lot of people, you'll see the files, you'll see let's say a YouTube video, and you'll see it's an embedded link essentially, where so they're calling a tool plugin to play the audio or play the video, but the site itself is being called to remotely and it's not on the local server. So there's only one copy of the file. You haven't copied the file and reused it. Instead, you're tagging to it. You're hyperlinking to it. And believe it or not, there's different copyright issues associated with that versus copying and pasting the file and loading it locally. For some strange reason, well, I know why. People don't like to borrow and link to something. Instead, they copy it and they put it in the local server. And you have one copy of it here, one copy of it here, one copy of it here. Not only does it cause junk, wasted space throughout the internet, which no one's really concerned with, you do have copyright infringement issues because you've made a copy of it. Just like if you copied a picture and you put it into a Word document and it wasn't your picture, you've pretty much broken the law. If you link to it, you haven't broken the law. So, interesting. And most people that you link to, what you do is you go, this is your ethics part of today's lecture, you go to the website in which you want to use a piece of audio. In fact, if you go to YouTube as an example, they set it up so they can give you the link. They'll give you what it is to use as the hyperlink to embed the video into your website. And when you call it up, it says YouTube on it to give credit to the source. And then these sites will also tell you what other type of copyright information you should include. And which on the bottom it might just be a topic, or a title to the image, or it might be a sub footnote to the image that says source, and then it shows the actual source of the author of the particular video or something. But YouTube gets around that by actually putting their emblem putting the watermark on the video itself, so you pretty much know where it came from, which is not a big deal, but that is the better way of doing it. The interesting thing with HTML and web development and stuff like this is you have many different ways of doing it. Some people prefer to cut and paste it, copy it, steal it, put it in their directory and use it illegally, because then it never goes away. But they've taken and they've copied it, so they've reproduced it, which is technically illegal. So if you don't, then you just stand the chance of the author selectively removing it, but isn't that their right? Think about it. You know, they have the right to remove it off of the internet if they want it removed. So it might ruin your website, but and actually the caveat you kind of have to pay attention to is when you hire a web developer or when you start doing it yourself, or if you've ever done it even for a school project, you got to give credit where credit's due. Don't reuse graphics, logos, images, and when we start looking at images and sound and stuff, it's really tempting. Oh look, here's another cool file. I can play this song as a background, and you won't know until you get a bill in the mail, you know, that says, hey, you know, you've been using this for 5 years. Here, you owe me $20,000. You know, I'm the author of this file. So, and then you don't pay, and you're gonna end up getting a lawsuit against you. So let's try to take a look to see how the link is used. And before this, kind of revisits the H hyperreference. It is a hyperreference. So you can actually do this with sound. You can do this with a Word file. You can do this with a PDF file. And most browsers these days have plugins to identify, and the browser would actually interpret this as being a WAV file and play it through Media Player or something. Or if it's a doc file, open up Microsoft Word. Or if it's a PDF, open up a PDF reader or something of that nature. So here we have the external reference to sound, and this is copied. This file itself is located in the local directory because we don't see a URL here. It's not referenced at all. The file will play when the user clicks on it, and the file opens up in another unspecified player, and then the browser determines the program that will play whatever file you've opened up. You can take it a step further and as an attribute specify the player. You can actually specify a URL for the player as well, which means that the user doesn't have to have the plugin, doesn't have to have anything installed in their browser. So that's if you were to create a link. You can also use this thing called a background sound tag. This is the irritating one. This, the user can just click on it and run it if they wanted to. This one's the irritating one. You can't stop. You can't. All you can do is close the browser window in order to stop it. If you have background sound, automatically plays the sound and Microsoft extension in HTML, and no way to turn it off without programming it. Like a little button, it says "Turn off my audio." So if you really want to make an irritating, this is how you make irritating web pages today, and how to get your web pages not to show up in search engine results. So, background sound. Irritate the users. Actually put up a big old video out there. So depending upon how big your background sound actually is, the user may never even hear it. It might take too long to load. They might be off the page by the time the background sound actually loads. So you can use an embed tag, and here we go. We have an embed source. We already have a sound file. Height 100, width 100. Places the player plugin in line. So the previous technique would actually run it in the background. You know, actually it's the browser itself that opens up Media Player or whatever and runs it. This particular way of using what's referred to it as an embedded plugin usually has a source where it would have, let's say, a URL. You can actually say what plugin. So you could say use Adobe, put the Adobe in the window, like Adobe Acrobat. Open up an Adobe window, so you can have a window inside of a window essentially, where it's going to play, and then run this file in here, which is nice because then you don't have to rely upon the web browser knowing what plugin, and you're specifying it must be opened up using Adobe. You can't use Promo PDF or something, or another PDF manufacturer or viewer. So no predicting what player is going to be used unless you specify it. The behavior is also unpredictable. And half the time this stuff fails. Because if you think about it, you know, the user may not necessarily have any audio player installed on their computer. And who knows what computer they're using. Yeah, so here's an example. I'm not going to run it because it's irritating. but I'll just go through the source code for you just to show you how to do it. Where we got play during URL, it's a URL, essentially moo.wave. I don't even have the wave file locally here. Where we have a hyperreference clicked up, where if you click on cow on the page, it's going to go moo. So theoretically, and there's an embedded source. And this is the source, same source we've seen in the previous examples, where we've put 2 of them in here. And the 2 tags are going to open up 2 little boxes. You know, what it's going to show you is the arrows, the left, the right arrow, the stop, because that's what you see in terms of an audio type of interface. If it were a video, it would show a blank box big enough, 100 by 100 or however you specified it, that would actually show the video in that particular box. So. And believe it or not, that's really all I can tell you about sound these days. That's how you do it. You either put it in a link or you make it on the background. And we'll see later on, there's different ways, of course, of embedding different multimedias inside of the web page. And most of it is knowing how to use the third-party tools, the plugins. Browser plugins become your friend when you want to do multimedia, especially when you start looking at, languages like Flash or Dreamweaver or something. And then you say, we have to use their plugins. You have to use, it's all proprietary stuff. So about image maps, because these are actually kind of interesting. It's not like a map like the U.S. map of countries. It's not like a U.S. geographical map, but it is. If you think about the mapping concept, it's all specified out in regions. And if you ever go to like one of those, here's a picture of the United States. Click where you are, and then it identifies whichever location you clicked on. It's the same concept, but people can take and use this for navigation, and it's actually kind of cool. It's still being used today. It looks better than buttons. It looks better than drop-down menus and stuff sometimes. But as an example, let's say you've got any picture at all. You take the picture, you divide it out into regions, and you put click events on the regions. And you say, well, if the user clicks here, down at the bottom where it says California, then we're going to take them to a website that shows California website information. If they click over here, we're going to show that in a different language or in a different screen. So it's basically used for navigation. We create image maps that specify zones, and we, just like we used frames last week, we say for this map, this zone, go to this URL. For that one, go to that URL. And it's kind of similar in concept to frames, actually, in how you use it. So image maps allow users to navigate to different web pages from clicking on the image itself. Depends on where you click on the image. That becomes the difficult part. In fact, I have a little example coming up. I'm not going to run it, but when you run it, it shows you where your mouse is in terms of region on the screen. That comes in handy, actually, because you got to know the XY coordinates in order to figure out if they clicked here on the image, this should happen. Over here, that should happen. So an image map consists of an image that's divided into regions. As I mentioned, each region is associated with a URL. Regions are called hot zones, or hot spots, or hot zones, if you want to think of it that way. So you can open up the URL that's associated with each one of the regions by clicking on the hot zone with your mouse. So you have to click on it exactly, the 2 pixels that were specified. Hopefully you're going to make a bigger region so it's easier to click on. And you have to associate this with any image. And the interesting thing is you can create an image map. Well, if it's generic enough, substitute the images in. The image is not in the image. So you load the image, you load the image map, and then voila, you've got your functionality. So you can swap both of them. You can come up with different maps of the US with different colors if the user wanted to change the preferences or something in the image changed. So one of the most commonly uses of the image map is creating graphical menus that you can use for navigation. Here's an image map. This is a real page, website that uses image maps. This is all an image. It's all graphics. These are not buttons. So sometimes when you go and you click on it and you hover the mouse over it, the button illuminates or the button goes in or the button does something and oh, it's a button. It's really part of the image. But it looks cool. I've never seen buttons like that before. Well, not lately. This is kind of old, actually. It's kind of outdated. But like say if you clicked in here, if you clicked, anywhere there was an image itself that had a map associated with it, you'd be able to navigate. And down here we have issues and things. So this is a classic way of kind of creating a nice graphic, associating an image map with it, and then you have your menuing scheme without having to use buttons or anything. So how does it look? It requires elements, an image, obviously. So in IMG, we've seen this already last time, actually. So it contains the source attribute that's specified in the name of the image file, and then we have a use map attribute. So on the image, we say use this map, and the map has zones that are relative to the image size and relative to the image locations within the geographical range of the image that present an ID and a name attribute. So we'll see this in an example coming up, but what we're looking at are values assigned to IDs and names that are part of a map element. And so we have an element tag called map. So we say for the image, we use this use map, and then we also have the map, as I mentioned before. It's two separate elements on the page, but one's using the other, obviously. The map element specifies the mapping coordinates, obviously, that are going to be included with the ID and the name, and the attributes that have the same values used in the image, hopefully. So we're looking at the use map, and in the use map, we can say the attributes are from a particular area. So we have area elements nested within the map element that identify the coordinates that create our hot zones or hot spots, if you want to call them that. They're just zones in the image itself. And then you proceed the value, you assign the use map attribute itself. So we have a value assigned to ID, we have a value assigned to name attributes. It's all in the map element. And then the image element, we have a number sign that basically refers to the particular image map areas that we have identified. So the map element defines the coordinates. It's used to create the image map's hot zone. The area element defines the regions. So we have the hot zones and we have the regions that we have nested inside of the map element. So here's some code for it, and you'll see I don't have the images located, but you can actually change the image names, put your own images on there, cut and paste it, put it into a text file, run it, double click on it like we did last week, and you can kind of see it transform in terms of what you're looking at. So here we have an image source. We looked at that already, and we're saying the source is 145 by height by width. Oh, excuse me, the width is 145, the height is 126. And then this is what I'm meaning here. It says use map number, and we did this. We saw the hash sign last week actually when we started looking at being able to navigate from within the page. Creates a tag element for us, or a spot in which we're going to define essentially what we're looking at. And then here we have ID. Here's our ID, map ID. And the ID element is equal to planet map, and the name's going to be planet map. And then we've defined the area as a rectangle, the coordinates, and then we have an alternative. The alternative is the same thing as we used last week in the image source. If the image is gone, it'll show the words sun instead. And then hyperreference, when we click on it, it's going to go to sun.html. So we've created it. We've put an image out on the screen. We've got a click point, an ID point. We've gone to the ID point. This is the same thing as we did last week when we hyperlinked from, when we created that menu of links and you clicked on the link and it took you to an ID further down the page. Same concept actually. So this is where it kind of comes from, or goes to. Uses the same logic. And then we have another area circle. So we have a rectangle, we have a circle, and the circle has different coordinates in it. Alternative text is going to be Mercury. So, and we essentially what we're looking at is a planet map. And we click on, the Mercury, click on the difference of the sun, and then we can actually, it'll take us and it'll show up the Venus, the Mercury, or the sun HTML page, essentially taking us to the correct location. So, to see the coordinates, actually this one here is, you're going to move the mouse over the image and you're going to look at the status bar, and you'll see, if you cut and paste this actually, it will work it will work in Internet Explorer or in Firefox. And what it's going to do is at the bottom in the status bar, it'll show you the coordinates. So a lot of people, what they end up having to do is put the image up into the page, run the mouse over it, kind of see the area, widen it a little bit, make it a little easier friendly. somehow view the coordinates if you're not going to do, like, for example, putting them in the status bar so you can see them for debugging purposes. You could, there's other open source software packages out there where you could take the image and define it out into different regions, and it will tell you the XY coordinates. But it's kind of like coming up with the RGB numbers for colors. You know, it's easy to pick it off of a palette, and then they can tell you, oh, this is the number for that shade that you're looking at. Kind of the same concept. You're letting some automated system tell you the coordinates. Because the hardest part with an image map is getting the coordinates correct, or getting them big enough or appropriate. You know, is the user clicking exactly in the middle? Are you going to require them to click exactly on one little pixel or something? You know, then makes it harder for the image map to work. And that's one of the biggest problems with image maps, is the user sits there and clicks on it forever until something happens, because you can't find the right thing to click on. It's kind of like how people get frustrated with touch applications. It's really the same thing. You're touching something on the screen, but exactly where are you touching it depends on the coordinate map, the image map, and the coordinate system that's designed for it. And if it's slightly off, it's too narrow, your fingers are too big, it's overlapping into other coordinates, then we have issues in terms of the user interface. So, and this is the one that uses the mouse to control the environment here, where we've got mouse over and mouse, and this is kind of your basic kind of mouse functionality to orient you to. What we're looking here is different events that happen, and this is not JavaScript, this is not a scripting language. This is basically using the object-oriented components of the web browser and the object-oriented components of the features that are automatically built into the HTTP interface. So as an example, the web browser knows about the mouse, it knows about the document that you're loading, it knows that have different properties that are being set for it. So you can actually tell, in fact here, let's just cut and paste this sucker. Actually, you know what, let me go back. Let's see. This one and the one before, it's actually kind of useful. Copy it. I can demonstrate my text wrangler now. Paste. There we go. This is the mouse over effect. And now you can actually kind of see what text wrangler is doing to it in terms of the coloring. We got the title of the page showing up. This is from last week, obviously. We have a header from last week showing us the mouse over effect. And we have a name dummy with href dummy, which is going to be a link, you know, from within the document itself. And I don't have the image, so I'm thinking that the box might just show up empty, is what I'm hoping. And then we're going to have an alert come up. That alert may or may not work depending upon your security settings. This alert is like a little pop-up box, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, depending upon the browser. And actually, let me just see if this works. We'll see what kind of effect we have. This may or may not necessarily, let's test at HTML. May not necessarily do what I'm expecting it to do. Let's see. My alert box isn't. Oh, there it is. Hey, it does work. Look, my image is missing. I didn't download any of the images. But if you cut and paste the code and you put it in, you'll see. If I hover over this particular image that's missing, I get hey. It's supposed to have dummy. I guess that's all I'm going to get. My status bar is not showing on the bottom, but I should have had a mouse over. That was, let me take a look at the example again. Mouse over document, the bottom source. Oh, it's supposed to change the image. Unfortunately, I don't have the images. So it's probably trying to change the images and then you just won't see it. So you can experiment with this. I would take and create some images, save the images as the names that are indicated here or something equivalent, or change them so they match, and then you can see the behavior. But what it's doing is it's taking the document dot the button dot, you know, SRS source, and from this particular image map that we have down here, depending upon and the name of the image that we've got for the document source is the button. And this is kind of a preliminary example of how HTML and how the web browser activity is object-oriented, because we do have a document, and the document is what's being loaded up, and we do have an element that is defined inside of the document, which is our image called the button right here. This is where that's coming from. And then we do have an attribute that's associated with that .srs that we're saying the source here is equal to this image. The source here is a click me up, click me down image. So apparently, I guess the label changes and it goes up and down or something. And it's probably an arrow that changes direction depending upon how you click on it. But you'll see the effect if you cut and paste it and look at it. But I'm showing this because it's kind of another relevant kind of way that people do menus. Nobody ever sticks buttons out there anymore or links out there. So if you're going to use an image, you can actually have the image change and have two, let's say, of the same button or same image that's representing some sort of a clickable item. I call it a button only because that's the common terminology for it. But you could have a picture of a dog. You put the image over the dog and it changes to a cat or something. Or it changes to something to say that you've selected that item. And this kind of goes along with the psychology of menuing systems and how people are using them. There has to be some sort of feedback that's given. And this is kind of the start of good user interface design. If you are at a website and you don't know that you can click on something, you're probably not going to click on it. If you do have the mouse over it and it says click here to win or something, then you're more likely to click on something, especially if you've got some user feedback. So sometimes it's just a shade that changes. Maybe the button gets lighter or darker to say you've selected that particular item, and then when you click on it, the common behavior is a click. Most users would do that. Then some event occurs, and this is basically how you would create a menu using these types of techniques if you're using an image map as an example. Because the interesting thing is the image map is working with the mouse is working with click events, and the click events are, is it clicked, is it on a click, or is it over, hover over, up, down, so mouse over, mouse out. So you can say, if you hover, you put the mouse into a particular region of this image map, do something. If the mouse goes out, do something. If your user clicks on it, do something. And then if you think about other programming languages like Visual Basic or actually Microsoft, the Visual Studio stuff, it's all in, out, or over. Is the box open, closed, or did the user click on it or something? So those are the common events that are programmed. Let me just take a look here. This one is map. Nope, that's not going to show you the coordinates. Let's just see something real quick. I don't know if without the images, I should have copied the images. I was looking for that particular example that showed the coordinates, but I don't believe this is, I believe this is not going to give me what I want, but let me just try it real quick and then I'll move on. No, this isn't. This isn't going to, yeah, well actually it did. This is the example, there's regions in here. If you specify left, right, top, down, I believe, it's going to take you, well, it's not taking me to sun because the sun doesn't exist. But if I go down and click over here, it should take, oh, still sun. Let's see, wait a minute. When I get to something outside of sun. Okay, whatever. No, the example's not going to work for you. Unless you put in those websites. It's basically showing you a picture that doesn't exist. It's having you, when you click on the different regions, it's supposed to be taking you to a different URL. However, I don't have the URLs either, so that's what the problem is. So, all right, let's talk about CSS. Moving right along. So let's see. Let's start my show again. And let's see. So we're talking about the mouse controls. We've got CSS. Let's talk about that as an orientation to it. And then next week, what we're going to do, because today's just kind of filling in the blanks of a lot of things I haven't shown you yet. And I haven't introduced CSS to you yet, so here you go. And then next week, we'll start building style sheets. So we're looking at the separating the content and the presentation. We're going to look at inline and document versus external methods, subclasses and elements, pseudo elements, and all sorts of different things that end up in a CSS and onto programming. So let's take a look here. So what we've got are introduction to styles and properties. We've seen that the tags have styles, and we actually have a style tag. And we've seen that each one of the tags has properties or attributes that can be set for it, such as a font size, a font width, perhaps common settings. So to ensure that future web page authoring separates out the definition of the elements in the document from how they appear, and special formatting extensions have been created, added to the HTML language, such as font as an element. So we depreciated from 4.0, and in XHTML 1.0, we've taken and we're now referring to CSS instead of using all those manual font techniques. So what does CSS stand for? It stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And they're standard set of they're standard by the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3Cs, and we'll actually demo that. I'll demo that next week for you, because I'll have, at that point we'll be creating CSS sheets and we'll be able to upload them, and we'll be able to use them, and we'll see something that gets validated, hopefully. And so we can use that to essentially set a standard for our web design. And now what we do is we have a single piece of CSS formatting information, such as a text, perhaps alignment, font size, and that's referred to as the style. We've actually seen this already last week when we saw the style tab, where we're setting a style for the paragraph as indented for 4 inches or something of that nature. So some of the style capabilities include the ability to change the fonts, the backgrounds, colors, modify the layout, the elements that appear in the browser. The information can be added directly to the browser, or it can be stored in a separate file. And if it's stored in a separate file, you can share it among many different pages, which is why people take that route. So here's what ends up happening. You get a web development team, somebody comes up with the CSS. It's an external file. And the CSS has a particular font that is liked, that's preferred, particular colors, particular sizes, particulars about the whole entire document format. And we're talking about, if you compare this to, like, say, a Microsoft Word document, you bring up different document templates. In the HTML world, you bring up different CSS sheets, and you take and create one standard CSS sheet. You apply it to the entire website. Everything has the same look and feel. All of these items can still be overridden inside of the web page. In fact, we can use the tags themselves inside. We can overwrite them. We can cascade them, which is why it's called cascading. So the term cascading refers to the web page's ability to use the CSS information from more than one source. So that's your definition of what it's meant by cascading. And so the files are the styles that are created. 2 parts are separated by the colon, and we'll see that in a particular example coming up. So we have the property, and the property is going to be, it refers to some specific style. And then we have the value that's assigned to the property. So it doesn't, in fact, a lot of people try to use equals, and we'll see the format in a few minutes, and that is usually what ends up, that the equals is used in terms of inside of the HTML text, and you're using the attribute, size that's associated with a font. So you're saying font size is equal to 12, and so you get into the habit of writing that particular HTML code, and then you go on to CSS, and like the syntax is wrong, and then it doesn't read correctly. So together, the CSS property and the value assigned to it are partners referred to as the declaration and the style declaration. So here we go. Here's our first CSS properties. So we have the property and we have the value that's associated with it. And this is the syntax for the style declaration. And this is what you're putting in when I'm calling a CSS file. So you create a text file just like you created the HTML file. It has nothing more than 25 or 30 of these things. It says, well, when we use color, color has the value of blue, as an example. And we set the different styles for each one of the different tags, different one of the attributes that we want to specify. And here are some properties, and this is a property example. Here's some common properties to to consider, and maybe some of you have seen these already. And here's our color that we just looked at a few minutes ago. It specifies the text color of an element. So we can say element is the P for paragraph. Color is going to be blue. Which means the text color of the entire paragraph is not going to be blue. So every time we go in there and we use P, we have blue text. Well, where's the blue text coming from? From the CSS, as long as we've included that file, or we've included that style tag in the beginning part of the document. We'll see the two ways of doing it in a few minutes. We have the font family. Font family is Arial, Veranda, Times Roman, Script. Font style, that would be bold, italics, underlined. Margin left, margin right. This is common actually for especially a paragraph tag, where we're going to set the align the text of the paragraph left or right, indented in, because we can actually make our own, like, indented paragraph style that's in a particular font, maybe for illustrative purposes. Text align is also very common in terms of a style that's set. It determines the alignment of the text, right, left, justified. So we have our properties that are available for CSS1 that are grouped into the following categories. So we have different CSS levels. And this is basically setting the standard that's by the W3Cs. That says, this belongs as a proper syntax or belongs as a proper property. So they're grouped into categories. We have color and background properties, font properties, text, boxes, classification properties. So what we have then is CSS recommendation for level 2 that's released in 1998, a long time ago. Just added more stuff to it. So it builds on the properties of 1. It includes new features for table properties, the ability to change the appearance of the mouse pointer, and some of the other kind of things that occur. We actually haven't passed to. We haven't had that much growth in it. It's kind of like HTML. It hasn't really. Once you get something that works, it's like it doesn't really require too much of an enhancement over the years. At the current time of this writing, no web browser provides complete support for properties available in CSS2. That's actually kind of outdated. This writing was a few years back, I would say about 2 or 3 years ago. Now there is support for CSS2, but we haven't gotten any further. So we're still on CSS2. So let's take a look at the different terminologies associated with the different ways of using this concept, and you'll see, because it makes absolutely no sense for me to show you all of the styles for CSS, all the properties for every one of them. That would bore you to death. Instead, what we'll do is look at some examples, and then we'll see these in relationship to how they're being used. So, inline styles, basic method for applying styles to use inline styles, which allow you to add style information to a single element in the document. This is what we've seen so far, actually, in a couple of different things that I showed you last week. So don't think about external files or anything of this sort. We're doing it inline. Inline, you use the style attribute. So this is where that style came from in terms of that tag. And it's assigned to assign an inline style information to an element. You can assign the style attribute property, declaration enclosed by quotation marks. We'll see an example of that coming up in a few minutes. The values themselves, so we have the properties and then we have the values, are assigned to depend on what type of property. So common mistake is actually to select the right property but assign the wrong value to it, or vice versa. And the problem with that is like nothing will happen. It's the same thing as HTML. We just won't see it in blue. Just won't see it underlined, just because it won't actually work. And so we make one mistake in one particular style attribute, and then it's just that particular style attribute that's going to have an issue. So some properties can be assigned a range of values as well. So we could say font family as an example and say Times Roman or Arabic or one of these families, and so we get all of the properties that are associated under that blanket. So we have a whole range of values that might be different sizes and things. So for instance, you can assign the font name that's available for the user's font system property. So you can just say font family property. And actually it uses what's on the computer. So this is where you come into issues. What if the font family doesn't exist on the computer that the browser is running on, which actually happened, and then you have the default property that's going to show up instead. Other properties, you have to assign a value from a specific set of available options. So in terms of length units, refers to the units of measure that you can apply to the style declaration to determine the size and positioning of the element. And for sizing and repositioning, it depends on the property and the element as to what's going to be assigned. So you assign the measurement property to the property by assigning the number that represents the number of units. So if we're talking about fonts, we might have 3, 2, 1. 1 might be 12. 2 might be, well, actually it gets bigger with the numbers. So 1 might be 12, 2 might be 14, 3 might be 16. And the unit of measure that's assigned to the property you have to look up. There's no way of knowing. Usually there's a reference, and we have tons of references online where we can look up associated number values that go to different selections and options. So not usually an issue because people get used to it. We also have color units. So the color unit represents the color value that you can assign to the property. And you can assign a color unit up to any one of 16 different names that are defined in CSS1. We can also have color units that are actually predefined, and you can actually come up with your own color units. And some classic examples of these 16 would be like red, white, blue. So you say this font property is equal to red, white. You can also use the RGB equivalent color numbers to it, unless, if you're not using the built-in ones. And here we go, the color value. So aqua, gray, green, lime, maroon. So we can say, font color is equal to maroon, and it's predefined already. And it's actually kind of interesting to know it's predefined in the CSS standard declaration, which means if you change declarations, you change, like say, support for the browser, that maroon might look red or it might look purple. So we have differences in the browser interpretation and specification of the CSS standard, which causes, if you've ever noticed, websites look different. Sometimes the colors look different. Sometimes the alignment, something might happen with it, and all of a sudden, you don't recognize it. So that's the danger you run into when you use these built-in colors, built-in sizes. Because not only are you assuming that the font group exists on the computer and that the browser recognizes it, but also that the same definition of maroon, the same RGB maroon color on Chrome is the same as IE or is the same as Firefox on different platforms as well, or mobile phones or whatever happens, whatever computer or system you're running it on. Most graphical computer systems use what's called an RGB color system that specify colors. So you can also assign a color using RGB color system. In fact, that's actually a little bit safer because then you get a true maroon or you get a true aqua if that's what you're interested in. So before we start seeing it, let's take a look at the content versus the presentation. So most of the HTML tags define content type independent of the presentation. So the style sheet associates the presentation format for the HTML element instead of the content. So we would say P as an example, we were saying paragraph. It's more of a content versus a presentation, and we're getting generic content, generic presentation that's associated with that content. So we use the CSS to enhance it, provide a more custom look to the paragraph or to whatever we happen to be working with in terms of the tag. So style sheet is also called a cascading style sheet since we are defining 3 different levels. And here are the 3 different levels that we're cascading. We have what I pretty much talked about, the inline style sheets that apply to the content in the single HTML element. We have the document style sheets that apply to the whole body of the document. That's the one that most people would actually start using. And then we have the external style sheets that link and applied to numerous documents. That's what you use for the entire website if you're going to actually put together multiple pages. And so you have lower level sheets can override higher level sheets. So we apply, let's say, an external CSS to a website. Then we can use a document style that's going to overwrite, let's say, the external, and then the inline is going to overwrite the document. So we can cascade it inward, essentially. And here we have an example, and this is what is probably going to put all the pieces together for you in terms of the syntax. So we're going to use the style attribute. We've seen that already. Can specify the presentation style for a single HTML element. Style can be applied to any HTML element. So within the tag, and this would be considered the inline style approach, and we've seen an example of this last week actually. Within the tag itself, we list the sequences of property values, property values, property values. In certain cases, this is where most people end up with a problem because they don't use the colon, then you put the equal sign in there instead. If you're doing it with HTML, strict HTML, you put the equal sign. If you're using a cascading inline style, you put the colon in. It's just property value, over and over. With any particular, it doesn't really matter which ones you put in first. Here's some examples. Font family, colon, courier, comma, monospace. So we can separate out the values by commas, and no spaces are actually required. Font style, colon, italics. Font weight is, not, I want to say equals, colon, bold. As soon as I said, don't put equals in there, I start saying it. Because it's very common for me to accidentally just type in equals on everything, and that will give you a problem. Font size 12, font size colon large, and these are examples. Larger, we could go small, medium, large. Same thing as color, they're built-in sizes. So whatever large happens to be specified by the CSS, whatever standard happens to be set for large is large. So you take your chances if you're going to use that. And here's an example of the RGB. So color colon red, or you could put in color colon and then you put the hash sign in and the RGB number, which just gives you how much red, which RG, red, green, and blue combinations in terms of how much of each one of them you're going to stick in there in the 3 different sets. And then the background dash color colon white, another example. Text decoration colon underline. You're probably at this point wondering, well, how do you know there's a text declaration property? And again, that's what you got to look up, because nobody ever memorizes what all these properties are called. And if you call the property by its improper name, it's not gonna do anything. It's just not gonna work. So here we have style 01, and I've actually, let's see if I can go back to Text Wrangler, and I'm going to. Don't know Text Wrangler. I'm going to open up something here. Style 01 that I copied. There we go. And actually, you know what? I can't. I've got to end the slide actually in order to do that. I wanted to bring it up in Firefox. I guess I could have done it. Hold on a second. Style 01. Here we go. So this is what it is essentially looking like. And when we see the code for this in a few minutes, you're going to go, well, that's a lot of work for just a simple little, because you can use it using HTML tags. You don't have to do a style sheet for this. But the purpose is, you know, what if we needed to override the document or override the external style sheet that we're using? This is basically how we would do it with an inline style of approach. And so we have here, which is a link that's in a red, the green text over here, and so we have some different alignment that's applied. If we look at the text for this, we're looking at and this might be easier to see than the slide because it's color coordinated. Style tag, which is what's giving us our inline. So style tag font family Arial, comma scanf. And we have the text alignment is to the right, so we have the right aligned text in the first sentence, and then we have style equals, and then we have the attribute that's in here, where we've got color colon green, and we have the quotation marks that are appearing because we're using XHTML compatibility. We could leave the quotation marks out, and we would be HTML compatible. But that's where you're going to see the one of the biggest differences in terms of next week when we start uploading files to the W3Cs to get them verified. You don't use quotation marks. It's going to be rejected. It's going to come out and say, not verified. Bad work. And it could be the same document. So this is what we've actually seen so far using the span. And what we're doing is we're including that tag to say this is an element for style, and we're going to style it from the beginning to the end of the span. And then whatever's outside of it is going to have a different style, or to have something else associated with it. And then we have a style color colon red, another attribute text declaration colon none, means we're not going to put bold or italics on it. Font style size large, hyperreference for a page and link. So it's actually kind of an easy inline, but what's referred to as inline is because the style tag is actually used and the style declaration actually appears in line in terms of where the rest of the text in the HTML is associated. So no one's going to ever, whoops, auto recovery. Now let's see. Okay, let me go back to the So this is the continuation of that same example, and we just saw that out there in the website. So document style sheets. So that was an example of the inline. It was one way of doing it. We can cascade it in another way, and in terms of the inline, it applies to individual elements that are in the page, as we've seen before, like individual text. So it can lead to inconsistencies. Similar elements are formatted differently. One example of that might be the header. Sometimes people like to change H1 to put it in a bold, put it in underlined or something. And the more inline you do, the less consistency you're going to end up in the end. So inline declarations, mix and match components, violates the general philosophy of HTML because HTML is supposed to be consistent, theoretically. So alternatively, you can apply a document style sheet that allows for a clean separation of the content and the presentation. You see more of the document level in a site that doesn't have that is not a real site. It's just 1 or 2 pages. You'll see document level CSS. When you see document level CSS in a complete website, they don't know how to do it externally. And then either that or it's been going on for years and no one's ever pulled it out and cleaned it up. Because ideally, if you're going to start from scratch and build an entire website, you're going to put it all external and have all the pages called to that one file. But normally, if you start looking at the source and you view some of the source, you'll see document style CSS everywhere. It's just because other people have worked on it. Here's the CSS we're using, and they just put it right there in the document. So it also guarantees that you're going to find it and be able to use it, versus having it in an external location in which the file might be missing, might be in a different directory, might not actually be called correctly. Someone might delete it, something might happen. So the style definitions are placed in the head section of the page if you're going to use the document. Within the style tags, same kind of notation as before. Can apply to all elements, subclasses of elements, and anything that is in existence throughout the page. And here's an example. I won't bother going out and showing it to you, but what we're looking at is up here at the head section. And in the head, the red text here is showing us the difference. We have the style type text CSS, where we said in the document, for this document, in the header, we're defining a CSS as a style type. As I mentioned before, the type is going to basically say we're text and we're CSS. We see this when we start looking at JavaScript and other scripting languages. We'll say, what's the type? It's JavaScript. What's this? And then you start defining your functions when you're using this particular technique. And this is classic. So we have H1 as an example, is the tag and the color, :blue. And then we have that separated by a semicolon. It says text alignment is going to be centered, :centered. And then that's all we have for H1. And then for p.indented, we're going to change the indentation to 0.2 in terms of units, inches. And we're going to leave everything else as the default. So we have our opening and our closing brackets that define our sets of properties and values that we're defining for each one of the tags. And then we're closing the style. So we have the opening and the closing of the style. And just use this particular format and just list out every one of the styles. And usually you see this right at the head or right at the beginning before any scripting languages, before anything else is actually defined in that document, because it's easier to find. And then you can easily change it. You change it here, it changes it for the entire document. So you don't have to change in every one of the locations. So you can imagine this is a lot more efficient if you're going to do it in the document level rather than doing it inline. You move it up to the header and do it for the entire document. And then one change here applies everywhere and they all look consistently. I mean, every time you use a P here, and every time we use an H1, it's all going to look the same. So you can cut and paste it and you can stick it in, and you can see how the P is indented now, and you can see how the H1 has changed. Now it's in blue instead of in black. So
you don't have to close the H1 in CSS?
It is closed. It's right here. You can't see it, but the closing bracket's right here. You put the CSS tags, list them out by the name of the tag, a space, an opening, and then a closing bracket. Inside the closing bracket and the opening bracket, you stick all of your sets separated by semicolon. So you go property value, property value, property. Mostly you would see this on different lines. It is actually on different lines, but there's not that much there. Usually it's easier to read because you see H1, you say, okay, and then you see the next one, and it looks like it's like big columns that are set up. It's not required. All it needs is one space. So you could do this in any format you want, but this is pretty much the the look and feel that's easier for people to read. Some people also like to go like H1 and then on a new line underneath it, put everything. So that's probably what you're thinking about. I don't know if you've seen it that way before. Here we're just talking about the indented part of P. So we're using a dot notation to, going back to my comments about object orientation, to resolve ourselves down to this particular property of P. So as an object. So, and I'll talk about more object-oriented stuff as we go through. It's not really an object-oriented. Well, the interesting thing is, although this is an object-oriented environment, we don't actually have a full implementation of it. We just have object references that we can do. So document style ensures that the similar elements are all formatted so that they're all consistent in terms of their look and feel. Note how clean the body is. You're supposed to be saying, oh yeah, this looks pretty clean. We're just using P, class indented. And we have using the class indented, and this paragraph will follow in terms of that particular tag. And here we have P down here, would not be indented because we've defined P dot indented. We said for P dot indented, if we use P dot indented, then we're going to have an indented paragraph. It's going to be different. So you might also get the impression at this point, hey, I can create my own tags. That's what you're doing. You're creating your own style tags. You're saying, use P dot highlighted, and the whole paragraph is yellow or something, or yellow background highlighted. So we can have document styles that are especially useful in terms of formatting tables. Okay, going back to the concept of the tables that we looked at last week, we could have the caption. And this particular example, I did download it, but it's kind of trivial. You can actually cut and paste the code, put it in a text file, run it. And what you're going to see is a table with a red title on the box, a title on the top, and you're going to see a caption that's going to be in italics, that's going to be underlined. And then you're going to see the background of the box is going to be red in terms of the table header. So TH, if you remember from last week, is table header. Background dash color is going to be red. And then we have the caption, we have the table. So inside the table tag, we have the caption and we have the TH attributes that we're setting. We're setting the style in terms of the property value for each one of those attributes. So if you think about it, we're just setting styles for attributes, so when we use the attribute, we're going to get some certain effect that actually shows up. So the document style itself effectively separates the content from the presentation. What if you wanted the right column, right justified of column numbers? If you want to change your mind, it's easy, you just change it up here. So it's kind of like, makes it easier without having to go through and find different areas in the document to change. It's like, if I changed the date and I had a variable that I called date, and I just changed the date, then that would be easier, per se, to change it in one spot. It's kind of like the same concept that applies to programming languages, programming in general. Pseudo elements. So they're used to address subparts of elements. And the interesting thing is all this stuff applies to everything. It applies towards inline, external, or document level. So all the tag formats are the same, all the concepts are the same. Depends on how you want to implement it. That's going to be different. So pseudo elements are used to address subparts of an element. So you can specify the appearance of a link for various different states: visited, active, however, so we can actually change the definitions instead of using the browser defaults. You can specify the format for the first line in a paragraph. Let's say first line is indented by 5 spaces or something. And that would be first dash line that we would set as an attribute for that. And then you can specify the format for the first letter. First letter is going to be big, small. Danger, changing the look of familiar elements is confusing. You are working with a user who knows what their viewed link looks like. I clicked on this one, clicked on that one, clicked on that one, and you're changing it back to their default, not viewed, not visited link. Then you're going to get users that go and look at this and go, wait a minute, I clicked on that link already. And then the logic gets messed up. It's like why I said last week, you never want to underline anything unless it's a hyperlink, because users will always try to click on anything that has an underline associated with it. And same thing true for color. Anything in red, anything that's again plays problems. So careful. Current browsers do not support all of the CSS2 features. That actually might be a little outdated. Current browsers are supporting. At the time of this writing, it may not have been the case, but right now, most of it, 99.9% of it, is actually being supported. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. A:visited, A:, active. These are the different attributes that are set with values that are associated with A in terms of the hyperlink. So A is the anchor. Remember that from last week. P colon first letter. So down here we say P colon first letter, and we can change in terms of the, well, actually we're not here, we're just using P in this particular case. So you can kind of get a feel. And what we're looking at, this is it. This is all you do with CSS. So CSS is pretty easy, actually. You're taking an entire course on an easy subject. So essentially you are. It's just, the little ins and outs of it are the hard part. And the trickiness, and getting practice using it is important. So the last but not least, the external style sheets. This is what you'll be doing for all of your programming assignments for this course. And I've actually had a couple of students tell me, hey, the links aren't there yet. You're right. The EMS is not configured for you to upload anything yet. So you'll have to wait if you have been working on assignments. I'm hoping within the next couple of weeks we're going to get everything in the EMS so you'll be able to upload your work. But right now you can't. So just hold off. But nothing is due till the end of the course, which I believe now, I understand, is August 16th or 20th? August 20th or 16th? Somewhere along the 16th or the 20th. So you still got another month. Actually, technically you have 2 months because today's like right after the 15th. So I think it's final exam week going from 16th to 20th. Okay, so modularity is what external style sheets are all about. So modularity is the key to development and reusing the software. Designing, implementing, testing, using, routing, everything. Packaging, making everything extendable, making everything reusable. So you place the style definitions in a separate file, you include the file, and I'll show you the syntax for that in a few minutes. And then you have multiple pages that can all share the same file. Here it is. Here is our mystyle.css. Some people wonder, do you have to call it .css? No. You don't, actually. You could just call it mystyle. You call it mystyle.txt. Just call it mystyle.c. Only problem is people identify files by the file extension. And 20 years from now, 5 years from now, maybe, you went back and where is that CSS file? And I have mystyle.c. Well, it sounds like a CSS file. It's easier to just call it CSS. But there's no rule that says you have to. And this might look familiar. This is the same thing we put in line H1. Actually, we use this in the document level. H1, which is the color blue, the text alignment, which was centered. And don't worry about these spaces here. It was justified inside of the box, the text on the slide. You don't have to put a space, but you can put a space if you want in between them. It's everything that goes in between the semicolons that's important. P dot indented, the 2 inches, the 0.2 inch indentation. So up here, this is the red part of the slide that is important to actually look at. And now you see you can change this, and it will affect every page on the website that uses this. One shot, which is not bad. So we have a link, relative, style sheet, type, text, CSS, hyperreference to style.css. If this was somewhere else other than the main directory or another location, you put the URL in there to specify the exact location. And then the title, which we're going to call it My Style. Just learn, this is basically how you're going to reference a external file and bring the external file in. You would do the same thing, actually, similar syntax to bring like a .js file for JavaScript or another file that you were loading in as a way of, in the header section, creating a link that's relative to a particular definition when we're calling it a style sheet, and the type is text CSS. So we're bringing and reading it in. This is nothing more than parsing information for the browser to tell the browser, find this file, bring it in, parse it as text, and load it up and get it ready for us. So we're substituting this with the file, essentially, in the long run after it's parsed. And then inside of the text here we have H1 we're using. It's going to follow through this with this format. Every time we use the tags in here, it uses it. So we could bring in multiple style sheets, like if we wanted to. We can mix and match style sheets. We can use the style sheet externally, define some for the document, and then put some in line as well if we want. That's where we get this cascading concept from. So, ideally, developers of the website would place the formatting options in the external file. All the website pages would also use the same CSS file, hopefully the same CSS file. And it ends up happening is people make and cut and paste it, and we can't find the CSS file. So they make a copy of the CSS file and they put it in the same directory as the website. And then lo and behold, somebody changes the CSS file for the rest of the site. So now all these pages look different because everybody made their own little copies of it, and only one copy of it got edited. So that actually happens, believe it or not. And then you go, how come? I thought we put the different logo on there, but some pages aren't using the right logo because they got the wrong, the wrong color or something. So, all right, this is how to show the creation date and the URL. Okay, so that's basically your orientation to CSS, and just to follow through with a few other remaining tidbits of information. One of those previous examples showed you how to use the status bar, and its status equals something, and you added some text, let's say, and the text was the coordinate locations. If you download one of those examples, you'll see that working. Another thing you can also do is see the creation date that's automatically created and stored by the web browser, and the URL information. Where is this exactly coming from? And here we're going to use this JavaScript preview in terms of our example. And in the header, we are going to not include anything. So in the body, we have a table here, and the table is going to have some information on it, or it's going to write out. Actually, what is this going to do? Document write here. Calling write using JavaScript, which I don't really want to tell you anything about JavaScript yet because we're going to introduce it in the next couple weeks coming up as soon as we get down to CSS. But essentially what we're looking at is going back to the concept of object orientation, calling write from document essentially as a method. And document has properties associated with it as an object. One of them being its URL, the other one is last modified date. So we can actually get that from the document property and write it to the screen, write it to a text box, and do whatever we want to it. So page's location, the last modified date, should automatically be displayed at the bottom of the screen. And if you view the source, you can cut and paste it, put in the appropriate text into the page in order to see what it looks like, in order to kind of preview it. You're not going to be able to see it. Actually, you can see it. It'll show up on the screen itself, in the body of the message. It won't show up on the status line. So you should be working on your first programming assignment. Use Notepad. Use anything you want. You do actually have to create a style sheet for the first programming assignment. And don't save. I'm going to do this for the benefit of new people. And I don't have it. Bummer. If I go to bhacker.com, I can find the first programming assignment. It's not in the EMS yet. And although you can't upload it yet, doesn't mean you can't work on it. And here we go. This is what I wanted to do. I don't believe I have previewed the first assignment yet for this class, have I? No, I'm having people shaking heads no. So I wanted to at least do this because now we've gone through all of the material needed for the first assignment. So now it's time to start thinking about that first assignment. And here it is. So let's see. You don't have to do anything too elaborate for the CSS. In fact, I think, let me refresh my memory on it, but I don't think you have to do more than like one or two different declarations. So let's see. View, zoom, make this bigger. Alright, so now that you're armed and dangerous with a few concepts, you're going to create your first website, or creating a web page. I'm not really going to call it a website. So your first assignment, you're going to create your own web page, and I didn't make this big. You know what? Hold on one second. Let me make this a little smaller. Well, you can't read it. You can read it on your own. I can't read it. It's too big. All right, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. I'm just going to give you the layout here. So your first assignment, you're going to create your own home page that's going to be placed on a website. You do not have to put this on a live website. You can just give me the .html file. Or if you give me the .html file and you're using images, then give me the image files as well. And also give me the CSS file as well. So you're going to put this in a directory maybe. So create a directory, put all the files in there. And as you've seen so far, hopefully you have the impression you don't need a web account for any of this. Okay, so you're going to open up Notepad or Text Wrangler or something of that sort. And you're going to tell the world about you. Your homepage will serve as a central repository for web-based applications, hopefully, that you're going to develop over the quarter or the term. You could just skip that part. You don't have to worry about it. You can put it in any directory you want. So the layout and the content of your web page are entirely up to you. I encourage you to be creative, produce a document hopefully that you're going to be proud of, maybe. And so your page needs to be divided into 2 frames. Okay, this is where a lot of people send me email messages or they ask questions like, well, frames aren't, you said frames aren't supported, should not be used anymore. I know. Forget everything I said about best practices and current things. It's a practice to get you to experiment with frames. So yes, I want you to create 2 frames. Whether or not it's, realistic in today's web environment, don't worry about that. On one side is going to contain personal information, so you have to figure out how to create 2 frames. And you're going to have 1 page with that. Obviously, maybe you'll have 1 HTML page that's going to define your 2 frames. That's going to load 2 websites, one on the left, one on the right, and they're going to be 2 HTML pages. So right now I'm talking about 3 files actually. So it's going to be more because I usually have 1 or 2 people that email me. Can we do this in multiple files? Yes. You're going to have to. So you have 1 file that does your frames, 2 files are left and the right. On the left-hand side, what did I say? You're going to have a menu. So one contains personal information and the other has a list of menu items. And the menu should include internal links that jump to locations from within the information page. The external links would be related to pages outside it, pages into the frame. So when you click on the links, it loads pages into the other frame. In fact, there was an example I went over last week that showed you a menu item and it loaded stuff on the right. That's what you're doing. You can pull it out of that lecture if you want to. I believe it was lecture 4. So your info page is going to have your name on the top of it. You can read through the rest of this, some personal information. Oh, what do I got here? Your information page should include some text formatting, bold, italics, color, big. And you should also include your favorite quotes using a block quote element. So you'll have to figure out what that one is. And some of these elements you'll have to look up, actually. There should be at least 1 list. So you're going to use a numbered list and ordered list. And this all comes from last week's lecture, actually. And you should have 5 links on the page, including a link to, and then obviously we're not at this school, we're at ITU. So substitute that with a link to IT websites. So pick the school, put your own link in there, essentially. At least one of those links must occur in a sequence, in a sentence, so you're embedding the hyperlink inside of a sentence. At least 2 images on the page, one for which you would have to store locally along with the web page. The other one is going to be an image that you're going to pull from another website. So 2 images. And must be at least 1 table. So you're going to create a table on there. Some of the rows might have to be longer than others. The page location and last modification date should automatically display at the bottom. I gave you the text for that. I didn't cut and paste it and put it in a web browser and show it to you, but lecture number 5, I believe it was, that we just looked at a few minutes ago, that last couple of slides showed you the code for which you need to use to put the last modification date on there. So just make note, the last 2 lectures, 4 and 5, are going to be used to create this because all of these items in here are either going to be in 4 or 5. So. And I don't believe I asked you to do an image map, so you don't have to worry about that. And your page must also use a style sheet that describes basic formatting style, including the format of the tables. So the style sheet should be defined in a separate file and linked to your page. So I want you to use an external style sheet, and it only has to define some basic formatting style and maybe 1 tag, maybe basic stuff, plus maybe the tables. And the interesting thing is in lecture number 5, I gave you an example of a style sheet for a table, and the style sheet for the table is actually this one. It is called Style 03. This is what I mean. This is what you're doing for your style sheet, but you're not doing it. This one is inline. And yeah, this one is done inline because because it's in the body section. So if it was for the document, it would be in the header section. So take this, put it into a style sheet if you want to do it that way. Put it into an external file. So you must use an external file for it. I don't want you to cut and paste this and just use it inside inline. So, and then I believe the bottom of the instructions is very close to the end of it. Your page should be use a standard HTML. So it's viewable using the Internet Explorer or Netscape. Obviously, I don't think Netscape is even around anymore, so you could use Firefox, anything. It works in any browser. While it may not look exactly the same due to inconsistencies with browser implementations, it doesn't really matter. Just so it looks reasonable. You're not being graded on your artistic abilities. What you're being graded on is, did you follow and did you implement every one of these bulleted items? So, and make sure your cascading style sheet is in a separate file. Okay. So you're going to have a handful of files. You have images, you're going to have at least 3 web pages, you're going to have a CSS file. So you can use pkzip, you can use Z, you can use RAR files, you can use anything you want, any compression method. You have to compress it all together into one file anyway in order to get it into the EMS. So, if you want, you can put it on a website and give me the URL to the website if you want to do it that way. And then I have to figure out, I have to go through and go to your website and figure it out that way. It's probably safer to upload it though, is what I'm thinking. Questions about the first programming assignment? Let me see. Oh, good. We're in good shape. Nope. Questions about anything talked about today? Nope. Then we're done. See you next week. Enjoy the